neighborhoods, families, and friends. I am truly honored that you have decided to offer me an honorary degree. I've been able to follow the history of the California Institute of Integral Studies, first of all, because my sister, Fania Davis, was a member of the 2003 graduating class when she received her PhD in indigenous epistemologies. Also, as I've learned about the origins of this institution, I believe that there was some early connection with integral yoga. And I mention this because my first formal encounter with yoga was with integral yoga founded by Sri Aurobindo. And I have to point out that I first began to practice yoga when I was in jail as a result of receiving a kind of do-it-yourself manual. And I also was very pleasantly surprised that Joseph Brinkman would also be receiving an honorary degree. When we were backstage, I immediately showed him the thermos I always carry with me with my traditional medicinal ginger tea. And there it is. So I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for acknowledging the scholarly and activist work I have attempted to do over the decades, and thus also through me for recognizing the many communities of struggle with which I have been associated, especially those that have creatively and productively conjoined scholarship and activism, and which have permitted broader notions of interdisciplinarity, which acknowledge the epistemological function of praxis, which acknowledge that knowledge is produced in venues other than those that are institutionalized and professionalized. Thank you. Recently, we have been urged to think about the lives that should matter to the world. There are those who assume that the struggle for Black freedom has reached its conclusion, particularly with the end of the second administration of the first Black president. Because Black people have been putatively accorded civil rights and are now, as the story goes, equal rights-bearing subjects before the law, although this is in dispute. It is assumed that we can dismantle the institutions that were created during an era when Black people were actively, an earlier era when Black people were actively involved in the struggle for freedom. But of course, that struggle is far from over. And the efforts to relegate affirmative action and Black studies programs, et cetera, to the dustbin of history are exceedingly premature. Democratic futures, and I think this is what we are all about, democratic futures, democratic with a small d. Democratic futures will not be based on the simple assimilation of communities that have been marginalized by existing structures of what is currently referred to as democracy. Assimilation into existing states of affairs have never fully brought us progress. Progress with respect to democracy, and freedom have only ever occurred with the challenging and reimagining and restructuring of institutions and discourses and knowledges. Revolutions, whether they be political, scientific, or discursive, are always dependent on a willingness to let go of what seems most natural, most normal, most comfortable. Consider the current discussion about whose image deserves to be placed on the $20 bill. Now, we know that no woman's image has ever appeared on paper money, so it is argued now is the time to make this shift. So I was recently asked whether I was happy to learn that Harriet Tubman's image may very well displace Andrew Jackson's on the $20 bill. And of course, I will rush to support any attempt to address U.S. historical absent-mindedness by asking us to think seriously about the role of slaveholder Andrew Jackson, who orchestrated violent removal campaigns directed at indigenous people in what came to be called the United States of America, but to simply replace him with Harriet Tubman, with the abolitionist Harriet Tubman, is to ignore the role that capitalism played in sustaining slavery and sustaining settler colonialism and racism more broadly. You might even argue that this simple substitution debases the legacy of Harriet Tubman. And certainly this assimilationist stance does not allow us to consider other possibilities. Instead of further legitimating the centrality of money in our societies by affixing Harriet Tubman's image on the $20 bill, imagine the possibility of abolishing the centrality of money altogether. In other words, by imagining a world in which what is most needed by living beings, human and otherwise, could not be so easily transformed into commodities, which might mean tuition-free education, free healthcare, free housing, and you can continue the list. So what is the role of educated beings? It seems to me that the role of educated beings is to suggest alternative frameworks, to imagine better ways of living and evolving worlds, to imagine new human relations that are freed from persisting hierarchies, whether they be economic, racial, sexual, political. And this is the spiritual significance of education. And that significance is that critical education, is truly the practice of freedom. Freedom, then, is not so much a state for which one yearns, but rather an incessant struggle to remake our lives, our relations, our communities, our democratic futures. I conclude by quoting Toni Morrison, who once said that if one is free, then one has to free someone else. The function of freedom, she said, is precisely to free someone else. Thank you very much. I am truly